Okay, guys, welcome back. Hope you had a good break. This is so much fun. I was talking to Ryan during the break. It's just like guys hanging out, eating donuts, talking Reformed theology. I mean, this is as good as it gets. I don't know what our wives are doing right now, but they're not having this much fun. I know that. That is for sure. They're not having as many donuts as we are. That's definitely true. You know, sometimes we have girls in this class, and the girls are invited to come because it's for elders and deacons, but it's also an open elective. So typically we do have women. This is the first time we've ever had all guys in this class. So David and I are wondering what's up with that. Too masculine, maybe. Too much testosterone. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but all guys this year. Well, brothers, we are going to switch gears now. So as we mentioned last time, every course we try to alternate between some theological stuff and then some practical stuff and then some church leadership type of stuff. And today, this second section right here is going to be our practical section. We're going to talk about the topic of church evangelism that actually works. I'm going to give a bunch of ideas of things that I think have worked, at least in my own experience. I would love to hear some feedback from you guys, too, of what you think really works towards the end if we have some time. I'll try to move through the content quickly enough so that you have some time to chat back with me a little bit. Tell me what you think actually works in terms of evangelism, because there's a lot that doesn't really work, unfortunately. There's a lot of effort and time and money spent on evangelistic programs that I don't think really have any real-world effect. And I'll even call a few of those out that I don't think are very effective in just a minute. But let's go ahead and start off biblically here in Romans chapter 10. And let's look here at why it is that we do evangelism at all. So in Romans chapter 10, Paul has given us the heart of the gospel, and he comes to a very powerful moment here in the middle of chapter 10 where he says, and this is sort of a famous verse here in verse 9, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. There's the essence of the gospel right there. Confessing and believing in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. For with the heart one believes and is justified, he says, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. For again, and he's quoting Joel here, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. No doubt about that. And interestingly, with our previous discussion on Calvinism and Arminianism, both sides would agree that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, for sure. But notice the switching of the gears here in verse 14. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless someone is sent, unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Okay, so there must then be a sending and a proclaiming and a heralding of the gospel in order for people to repent and to believe. And so our question here in this more practical aspect of our time together is, what actually works in terms of evangelism? Now, let me say a couple of things here. I'm going to start off a little skeptically, okay? Maybe I'm Debbie Downer on this a bit. Maybe I'm too harsh. Maybe I'm too much of a critic of some of the things that I see programmatically. But in general, I am amongst those who are generally pretty skeptical about evangelistic programs, in as much as somebody comes up with a new idea, perhaps something that's never been tried before. They're going to put together some kind of a big event. They're going to gather together a ton of money, and they're going to do some kind of mechanism for evangelism that is going to be the new it factor. It's going to be the new big thing. It's going to be the thing that really smashes and has broad success across the span of different kinds of folks. So I'm thinking about things like Super Bowl commercials. You know, there's that huge He Gets Us ad campaign that came out. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars that they spent on that particular series of ads. I'm told that it's like $1 million a minute to do something like that. And a bunch of people, apparently with some pretty deep pockets, put together a series of television commercials, hoping to share the gospel with the world. And my question is, did that actually work? Where are the converts for this? Whose life was changed by that series of ads? And again, like maybe I'm just a little bit of a hard-nosed, old-school Presbyterian, but I'm not sure that stuff really works when it comes down to like actually saving souls, as Paul talks about here in Romans chapter 10. So off the bat, let me just say that I'm not really one who's prone to run to the latest, greatest big program to try to solve the evangelism problem. We all agree that we should share the gospel, but sometimes we're not exactly sure how. Now, let me just give an example of the kinds of things that I am skeptical about, okay? And this one is from a lot of the stuff is experiential, things that I've been through before that have worked or not worked conversely in my experience. So when I was in Florida, 11 years down in the South. Now, in the South, there still is kind of this ethos and the cultural expectation for revivalism, okay? Something left over from probably the Second Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening I feel pretty fondly about. The Second Great Awakening I'm a little bit more skeptical about in terms of mechanisms and means. In the Second Great Awakening, there was sort of this more concerted effort to devise new structures, new ways to reach out to people, new contrivances, they called them. Charles Finney was an advocate of what he called new measures to try to bring people to the gospel. And so this kind of a revivalism is still very present down in the South. We don't have it so much here up north, but in the South there's this idea that, you know, if you want to call people back to the gospel, what you have to do is you have to rent a big tent and you have to get some guest speakers and you come and you have a revival week. And that idea only works in as much as Christianity is already intrinsic to the culture. Because really what those revival type meetings are is they're more like renewal meetings. They're calling people back to the conviction that they had when they were younger. But as far as actually evangelizing people for the first time, that's not really what they do. People don't tend to come to that stuff if they've never heard the gospel before. So anyway, when I first got there, this is 2008 or 2009, the ministerial committee for the town, and we had a nice little town, the ministers got together, the pastors got together, and we were asked to participate in the latest revival program. And it was going to be centered around July 4th, the holiday. And the idea was that somebody had a huge swath of land and we were going to pitch the big tent and we were going to have country music singers come out. We were going to pay a lot of money to get some pretty well-known country music folks to come out. We were going to pay something in the order of $10,000 or more, $17,000 to get fireworks. They wanted it to be the best series of fireworks that Brooksville had ever had. And then between bands, while we switched off from country singer to country singer, each one of the ministerial committee was going to come up and give a devotion, and they were going to call the people back to the gospel. And this was the plan for how it was going to be done. And the total cost for this whole program was going to be something like $50,000 to $60,000 to put this on. It was going to be one big weekend. People were going to get saved like crazy, and Brooksville was going to be revived. Well, we said no. Our elders said no, and I'm thankful that we did say no, because as it ended up, the event did take place, but one of the pastors ended up funding it on his own credit card and got in tens of thousands of dollars deep in debt in order to pay the bands and to pay for the fireworks. And unfortunately, though the event itself was a success, people did come out, they did listen to the music, and they did watch the fireworks. Every time one of the pastors got up on the platform to preach, the crowd would disperse, and they would go back and they would get their snacks, and they would go back to their blankets and whatever. And all of the ministers were pretty frustrated about the success of the gospel in terms of that particular event. So that for me, I'm glad we did not participate as a church, because again, though the event might have been successful to some extent, I don't think that it was successful in its ultimate end, which was to bring people to the Lord. So I come at this whole topic with a little bit of Presbyterian skepticism, okay? Maybe that's just who we are as Presbyterians. Maybe it's one of our faults. Maybe it's just our mood, but I don't think so. I actually think that a lot of evangelistic efforts are a drain of financial resources for the church. I believe that they tend to exhaust volunteers. In fact, the more programs that you have at any given church, the more you're asking and demanding of your volunteers. You're really asking quite a bit from them to continue to show up, not only to teach their regular Sunday schools and have their own family devotions and things like that, but you're asking them to participate in all of these programs. It takes volunteer time, it takes meeting time, there's costs. It distracts the pastors from their actual task, which is to be ordinary means of grace ministers, preaching and teaching, administering the sacraments to their own people regularly. It costs pastors a lot of effort in order to do these things. And quite a few of them are really low impact, low return on investment as far as what you actually get out of it. Now, maybe even the phrase get out of it, maybe I shouldn't say it that way, because again, we're talking about souls. And somebody could argue, you could see the counter argument. Okay, so we spent $50,000 on the country bands and the fireworks, but somebody got saved. Okay, great. Well, what's the value of a soul? I don't know. Infinite value as far as I'm concerned. But let's be realists here too, that to some extent, whenever we try to gin up these mechanisms for mass revival, unfortunately, I do think that the blood cost of the local church is pretty exorbitant. And you try to pace yourself out with these incredible programs, and unfortunately, I do worry that we might be trying to reinvent the wheel that's already round if we were to simply look at the way that the New Testament goes about its evangelism. And so what am I arguing for here? Well, I would argue that primarily for Reformed churches like us, we are already doing the work of evangelism when we are faithfully administering an ordinary means of grace ministry in the local church. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that. So what do I mean by the ordinary means of grace here? Well, Shorter Catechism number 88 says, "What are the outward and ordinary means whereby Christ communicateth to us the benefits of redemption?" In other words, how do you get Jesus into the hearts of the folk? That's what the question is asking in so many words, right? How does the benefit of the death of Christ avail to the saving of souls? Well, here's the answer that the Westminster Divines gave in question 88. The outward and ordinary means whereby Christ communicateth to us the benefits of redemption are his ordinances, especially the word, sacraments, and prayer, all of which are made effectual to the elect for salvation. Notice that in the answer, there's nothing about fireworks, there's nothing about Christian movies, there's nothing about Super Bowl commercials, there's nothing about Evangicubes. Have you seen the Evangicube? It's like a Rubik's Cube, and you give it to somebody and they twist it around, and then there's questions and answers about Jesus. It apparently works. Something like that. I don't know. There's evangelistic toys, and there's evangelistic films, and there's evangelistic veggie tales, and the church has invented all kinds of ways to try to share the gospel. And great, like I'm for freedom and inventiveness to some extent, but listen again to the answer. The ordinary and outward means whereby Christ communicates the benefits of the gospel are the preaching of the word, the administration of the sacraments, and prayer, all of which are made effectual to the elect for salvation. God's primary program for evangelizing the world is the local church. Okay, that's the big E on the eye chart of my message here this morning. If you want to evangelize the world, you need a strong, robust local church. That's what you need. Is it slow? Yeah, it's slow. Is it effective? Yeah, it's also really effective, though, because that's the means by which Christ has determined that the world will be reached through the ministration of the local church. Here's another one, 89. How is the word made effectual to salvation? Answer. The Spirit of God maketh the reading, but especially the preaching of the word, an effectual means of convincing and converting sinners and of building them up in holiness and comfort through faith unto salvation. So again, my contention here is that when a church is faithfully preaching and teaching the word of God, we are already doing the work of evangelism. In fact, the very ordained means of evangelism that God has given us in the pages of the Gospels and especially in the book of Acts. I am increasingly concerned, here's more concern, that the church has turned to a new means again to try to reach people, and that new means is what I'm calling Worshiptainment. I just put out my new short little book called Worshiptainment, the Modern Church's Golden Calf, in which I largely critique this amalgamation of some aspects of Christian worship with a lot of aspects of entertainment. I think that that is an ungodly and dangerous amalgam, okay? When you try to take holy worship on one hand, and you put in 2 to 3 lumps of entertainment and stir that into some sort of a new concoction or brew, I don't think that that's a good way to do worship or entertainment, quite frankly. What is worshiptainment? Well, I define it as an ungodly amalgamation of Lord's Day worship with elements of cultural entertainment with the intention of attracting seekers, but with the mammoth deficit of compromising holy worship. Okay, so the idea is, let's bring in the unbelievers to church, let's make church entertaining so that they like it, and then we'll sneak in some evangelism on the side so that perhaps by some newfangled way we'll make church more attractive to the unbeliever. So that's problematic for me. I think that worshiptainment, for the most part, should be marked and avoided. It is a violation of the regulative principle of Reformed worship. And that's not going to be something that we do here at Gospel Fellowship. Okay, so if you're thinking that we're going to try to attract the masses by the lights and the smoke and the fog machines and the lasers and entertainers coming through, we're just not going that direction. I had a friend one time, true story. He said, "You wouldn't believe it, our attendance doubled the last month." I said, "Well, what did you do different?" He said, "Well, we had Mr. T come as a guest speaker." I was like, "That's great. What happened when Mr. T left?" Well, our attendance went back to where it was before. Okay, so that's worshiptainment, the using of well-known personalities, stars, lights, anything attractive. But the problem is, the more you do it, the more you have to keep it up. And it's like, remember the episode of Happy Days when Fonzie jumps the shark? It's the most ridiculous episode of Happy Days. Like, that's become a byword, jumping the shark, because what do you do after that? Once Fonzie's jumped the shark, then like you got to keep advancing the dynamism, and that's unsustainable. So I don't think worshiptainment is a viable means. Anything that looks like worshiptainment to me is out. Theatrics, movie clips, live acting skits, pet blessings, the Eucharist, that's real, by the way. They do it in Europe a lot. It's a Eucharist with U2 songs, okay? So you have all these various U2 songs, and they've contrived a new form of sacrament. There was the Beyonce Mass as well. Summer at the movies. People show movies in church instead of preaching the gospel. The power team, I saw them in real life one time. They'll come and they'll smash bricks and break boards and stuff like that in church and then preach the gospel. It's all real stuff, and it's all really dangerous in my view. Okay, so anything that strikes of worshiptainment is out for me. Now, okay, that's my spiel and that's my lecture. However, we should still do something though, right? Like, okay, so there's a lot of things that I think are probably not good ideas, but we should still do something to reach people. So what is that something that really works? Is there anything that we can do to reach unbelievers that are outside the walls of the local church so as to create real, viable gospel encounters with people that do not currently know Christ and do not currently attend church? In other words, am I saying that we should give up and do nothing about evangelism? No, I'm not saying that either. So for the rest of our time together, I'm going to show you a few things that I think have worked in my experience and that do not violate the regulative principle and do not fall into the category of worshiptainment, okay? So here are a few ideas, and then I'll have some time, I hope, for some of your ideas. Number one, church planting. This is biblical. Church planting is the mechanism for evangelism that we see in the book of Acts. Okay? I have no doubt about that, and I have no doubt about the fact that church planting is probably the single most effective way to reach even unbelievers with the gospel. Why is that? Well, because whenever churches are planted, most of the people that begin to attend, and I'll show you some statistics here, are actually people that are either disenfranchised or unchurched. whenever you plant a new church in a new area, you do tend to get a few people that are mature believers that will start attending, but you also tend to attract people that are not believers and that are not currently involved in some particular local church. Now, is that easy? No, it's actually really hard. And Ascension Presbytery has, to some extent, floundered in our attempts to plant viable churches. Unfortunately, that is true. We are still technically attempting to plant a church here in our area, but for the most part, we've ground to a halt based on our lack of ability to find a church planter. That's what we really need right now, is somebody that can do the work of a church planting evangelist. Now, I cannot say, and please don't hear me saying that I'm some church planting guru. I most certainly am not. But when we were in Florida, we did manage to plant one local church, and it was a successful church plant. Faith Church planted Providence Church, which still exists today, and both churches are strong and vibrant. So here's the statistics from Tim Keller. Tim Keller says in his book, Center Church, studies confirm that the average new church gains 1/3 to 2/3 of its new members from the ranks of people who are not attending any worshiping body, while churches over 10 to 15 years of age gain 80 to 90% of new members from transfer from other congregations. So look at that. That's kind of scary. So a church plant will get somewhere between 33 and 66% of its people that are unchurched to come. But churches like us, which have been around for a while, 80 to 90% of our new members are going to be from transfer growth, which means basically people, they either move or they get disgruntled or, there's some kind of leadership issue or church split or whatever. So that's not great, okay? So older churches they still can grow, especially if neighborhood demographics change. Like for us, we're growing presumably because we got new developments everywhere. But unfortunately, older churches don't do very well at incorporating unbelievers of the unchurched, whereas, according to Keller studies at least, church plants do that pretty successfully. Now, what we did, and this is what we did at Faith Church in Brooksville, why it worked, we happened to have a very talented, called, very mature Christian man on staff who was ready for a new challenge. He was our youth director. He was fairly old for a youth director. He was almost 45, even closer to 50, which is pretty old for a youth pastor. But he was ready to become a senior pastor, and so we sent him off to the next town, and we put his salary on a decreasing chart over 5 years, so that the first year of church planting, we paid him 100% of his regular salary. The second year, we paid him 80%. The third year, we paid him 60%. So where was the salary coming from? Well, it came from the church plant itself. So we agreed for 5-6 years we're going to support this guy on a descending model where we would continue to pay him. Meanwhile, his church planting income would increase. So for instance, the first year, we're paying him 100%, and hopefully they're getting just a little bit of modicum of tithing and giving, charitable offerings coming in. But as the amount that we paid him went down, and he worked really, really hard. He really did. He was a great church planter. The model was that the new believers and the new members for Providence Church, the church that we're planting, the giving went up. And so he was able to, out of 5 years, not lose any of his salary. So that really worked this particular time. Okay. The second idea that I have that I've seen actually work is catechism. Now, we talked about this last week a little bit, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this, again, fits in that ordinary means of grace kind of evangelism that we talked about last week. Gospel Fellowship, our church, is highly committed to the idea of catechism, okay, raising our children in the faith. And you could say, well, that's not evangelism because there are covenant children and they're baptized and we're raising them in the Lord. But yeah, it is evangelism too, in the sense that we expect our children to be converted, to be savingly wrought upon, that God in His due time would regenerate, we trust, their hearts. Is that a foolproof method? Are there certain children that are catechized that don't end up being vibrant Christians? Yeah, sure, that happens too. But the success, the percentage, the numbers of children that are raised in the Lord and have churches that have taught them faithfully their catechetical doctrine so that they're raised with a Christian belief set and worldview, That's a pretty strong backing. Okay, so I definitely believe that catechism is a kind of generational evangelism. Okay, Beakey says this, and I have a couple quotes we're going to skip here because we talked about them last week. Every church desires growth, yes. Surprisingly few churches, however, seek to promote internal church growth. So there's an idea right there, right? By stressing the need to raise our children in covenantal truth. Few seriously grapple with why many adolescents become nominal members with mere notional faith or abandon evangelical truth for unbiblical doctrine and modes of worship. So here's what Beakey's saying. You wonder why your kids go off to college and leave the church forever? Because you've been feeding them junk food spiritually for 18 years. Your children have been taken out of the church during worship for kids' church or youth group church or whatever. They're not really even equipped or able to sit through a worship service. When you take them out of the church, you put a screen in front of them and you expect Veggie Tales to disciple your children in the church and in the truth. And then when they come to youth group, you put on these huge events where the youth pastor is going to jump the shark like Fonzie in a Happy Days episode, and he's going to entertain them, and he's going to swallow a goldfish if you can finally get 100 people to youth group that night. Like that kind of junk food youth group model does not work. And then when they go off to college, the first time somebody challenges their worldview on evolution or gay marriage or homosexuality or abortion or whatever, they don't have the mechanisms to defend their worldview. They weren't trained. And so if you want to do like preventive evangelism loss, like you actually don't want your church to diminish, then raise them solidly in the faith from the beginning. Okay? So yeah, I think Beakey's exactly right. Family worship and catechetical instruction will prevent the hemorrhaging of the loss of kids when they go off to college. Okay? Especially when their worldview is challenged. Here's T.F. Torrance on catechism. The Reformation catechisms aim to give a comprehensive exposition of the gospel of Jesus Christ in the context of the whole counsel of God and the whole life of the people of God. They sow the seed that germinates in the soil, brings forth living fruit, provides good grain of use in the next generation. They shape the mind of the historical church, building up its understanding of faith, directing its growth for the development so that it remains the same household and habitation of God built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets of Christ Jesus himself being the chief cornerstone. Okay? So one of the ways that we do evangelism is by having babies and raising them in the faith, and then teaching them that faith so that they don't go off to college and become secular progressives. Okay? So it's kind of like preventive evangelism loss. We looked at Calvin last time. Here's another one that honestly, like I'm sold that this works. This really works. What we're doing right now with the Compassion Project is so easy and it's so simple. I'm surprised that not everybody is doing this. It seems to be very New Testament. What we're doing right now with Compassion Project is we are simply giving out free meals and then teaching the Bible. We happen to stumble upon this place, the Lafayette building. They're hungry for truth. They're thankful that we come. The people love David and Christian and Roy and Ray and whoever else comes. We feed them a home-cooked meal, and then we have Bible study with them. And then if we have any meals left over, we take them onto the streets and we give them out in downtown Butler. I'm pretty stoked about what we're seeing with our folks there. Last night, we had Compassion Project last night, and we were doing prayer requests after the study. You know, one of the biggest prayer requests that they're asking for is that they want to evangelize their own building. And there's a core group of Christians that we're meeting with there, and they can't really get out because they don't have cars and they can't walk very far and they don't have bikes or mopeds or anything. So most of their life is right there in the building. And they're praying for their unbelieving neighbors on different floors and down the hallways. And it's just a beautiful thing. And every single time we give out food and teach the Bible, I come home just feeling blessed and thankful that our church is doing that. This is not rocket science. We don't need to spend $1 million to buy commercial space or create the Chosen TV series where actors portray Jesus. Jesus is pretty clear about the blessing of simply giving out meals and then teaching the Bible. In fact, isn't that exactly what he did with the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000? Isn't that what he's talking about when he talks about if you give away a cup of cold water in my name, you will surely not lose your reward? So evangelism doesn't have to be a lot more complicated than feeding the poor and then taking the opportunity to talk to them about Christ. I'm really thrilled with what we're doing in downtown Butler right now. Now, here's a strong opinion. I think that every single church should have some kind of outreach ministry on one of these areas. Either they're pushing hard for the cause of life, or homelessness, or feeding the poor, soup kitchens, or something for the sojourners or the immigrants. But some of these social needs are actually really incredible opportunities to reach people with the gospel. Now, I don't think, let me go back to my over-programmatizing skepticism. I do not think that every church needs to do all of these. I think that will wear you out. I think if a local church tried to solve all of these problems, that would be too much. You'd be asking too much. And once again, it would cost you too much lifeblood from your ordinary means of grace local church preaching and teaching ministry. But I think every church could reasonably pick one of these and make it their outreach program that they do tend to focus on. Because these are so organic and they're so simple and they're so ubiquitously needed. Whether you're in a church or a city or a small town or a rural area, one of these possibilities is probably a realistic one for your church to approach. Can you do them all? That might be asking too much. Can you do one of these? Yeah, you probably should. Okay, so that's just an opinion of mine. I've had in my ministry, and again, I'm not the model of the best evangelist in the world. I'm strongly inclined to men's ministry in particular. I think that works as a form of church growth and evangelism. I've tried in my ministry to make the men one of my foci, one of my focuses in my personal ministry. I did it at Brooksville, and I did it when I came here. I made lists of the men of the church and just tried to get together with them all for breakfast. I'm looking around. I think I've been to breakfast or lunch with every person in this meeting right here probably multiple times. Am I wrong? I think I have. Roy, have I been with? Okay, you're next. You're on my list. I got a wanted list, and you're on it. Well, yeah, you are. Yeah, I've seen you there too. Never mind. When churches focus on men, there's something powerful about that. Because unfortunately, much of worshiptainment and programmatic evangelism is actually aimed at women. Now, what's wrong with that? Women they need the gospel too. Yeah. Kids too, yes. Definitely kids too. But there's a truism that when a man is converted to Christ and begins to take seriously his discipleship in the Lord, he tends to bring his family with him. Whereas it's not conversely true that when a teenager finds the faith, praise God, or a woman strongly connects with the church, that her husband will necessarily follow. So it's not a two-way street there. When a man is serious about Christ, he tends to bring his family with him, but it's not always true the other way. So just think about our church. Now, we're kind of unusual in our church because we have a lot of strong marriages. We don't have a lot of broken families here. That's not true for a lot of other churches, especially city churches where almost every family is broken to some extent. But can you think of an example? I'm just challenging you right now. And don't say it because we're recording this. Can you think of a simple example, even one, in our church, where the father, the husband, the man is on fire from the Lord, but he can't seem to get his family to come with him? I can't think of any. It's hard to find examples of men that love the Lord that don't also bring their whole family with them. But I can think of counterexamples where a teenager is coming but can't get mom and dad, or mom is coming but can't get husband and kids involved. That seems to be an interesting dynamic. Maybe the Bible is right when it talks about the man's role as the head of his household. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something true about that. So that's why I have personally tried to invest a lot in men's Bible studies and men's ministry, getting together with men for breakfast, lunches, dinners, etc. I just think that tends to show results in the long run. Now, this is a little programmatic, so call me a hypocrite about what I just said. That's fine. I'll take it. One thing that we did here that really worked is when we did a couple of lectures on some current events topics. We did the 2020 lectures on critical race theory on a Wednesday night. I don't know if you were there for that. The place was packed, and we gained people that night that have never left the church. They loved the fact that we were willing to take a stand on some controversial moral issues, and the church grew in that extent. I wish we had time to do more of these kinds of things where we tackle some really very current events from a very biblical perspective. I think that would probably yield some good results. Funeral lunches are very simple and a real blessing. Whenever we show genuine concern for families that are grieving, the dividends are pretty palpable. They're pretty powerful. I'm very thankful for our women's ministry here, because when a church shows up in moments where a member is suffering, it's an incredible witness to the life and the vibrancy of Christ and the power of the local church. Don't you feel sorry for people when they die and they don't have a church? And they have to do the funeral at some funeral home that they're never going to go to, and it's so cold and it's so impersonal. I always feel bad when somebody dies and they don't have a pastor, they don't have a church, they don't have a church family. That is so tragic. Not only are they suffering the loss of their loved one, but then they have to endure these horrible moments of the impersonalization of the funeral processes. Whereas I cannot tell you how many times we've had a funeral here where the church family surrounds that person and a lunch is served and basic hospitality is done. And the people who show up and observe are moved by what they've experienced. Thankfully, people don't die every day, right? But when they do, the church shows itself strong when it cares for its own people in these kinds of grieving moments. And believe me, people notice. People notice. This is one that I've not done, and so I cannot say that I know much about this, but I knew a church that grew a very vibrant ministry through its counseling practice. It had a free pastoral counseling program where the pastor himself was a trained ACBC biblical counselor, and they made that their primary outreach ministry. This is the only evangelistic program that they did, and it worked like crazy. The pastor had to spend a lot of hours training other counselors and counseling people himself. But this was a little tiny dime store facility. We would not want to worship there, trust me. It was just a little former Kmart or something like that. And they had a powerful ministry because they gave away free counseling to people in distress. One of the requirements is that you had to tithe and you had to be part of the local church. And that church grew because the pastor and their elders loved people in their times of necessity. Excellence in worship. I mentioned worshiptainment is something I want to seek to avoid with all of my heart. But doing worship excellently is not the same thing as worshiptainment. Okay, when you highly value your worship service so that you strive for excellence, whatever musical style you have, whether it's organ or piano or a cappella, if you strive for excellence there, that is a beautiful thing. When the bulletin doesn't have a lot of errors and the slides are crisp and there's warmth and a genuine spirit of welcome by the greeters, when a visitor comes and there's powerful preaching And when the service seems to be done well because God is worthy of excellence, that in itself is a form of evangelism, and people are drawn into that experience. And I don't even think really that the style matters all that terribly much if everything that is done excellently. Okay, so if you're going to sing a cappella psalms, great. I love a cappella psalms, but the congregation has to sing robustly, right? And if they do, man, that's powerful. You don't even need to have an instrumentalist. Like if it's done with excellence and people sing from the heart, excellence is excellent in and of itself. And the same thing is true with the organ or the piano or the preaching, even the small details about the service. You said there's a communication card in the pew. If they go to find one and it's not there, that's not excellent, and people wonder about what's going on. So whatever you do it well, and that does seem to be attractive to visitors. I'm going to stop here. I have a few more ideas, but I wanted to hear some of your ideas before we take our next break. What are some things, brothers, that you've experienced that have legitimately and genuinely worked in the context in which you've been in ministry before? Any thoughts? Mitch?
I love what I do on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I believe I used to have a spirit of timidity, but it's changed with a spirit of power to just have this small change, paradigm shift, where I just learn to share the gospel wherever I am.
Yeah.
Whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's shopping in a supermarket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it all started with having just the power to be able to get out there and just share it on the street with strangers. And what's interesting about that is, the thing that doesn't always happen is contacts where you're able to start a friendship and take them out. But it's happened like about maybe 2 dozen times.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to take these people out, and something happens, I invite them to a church.
Yeah.
And it's just such a great thing when you just don't feel timid and you feel that you can share the gospel everywhere you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've learned to do. So even though I love people to come out in the streets with me and learn how easy it is, and it's fun, and because you're meeting disenfranchised, you're meeting progressive liberals, you're meeting, I do it in Jewish, I meet a lot of Jewish rabbis, people who are religious, non-religious, people from all walks of life. So it's taught me a lot, because I learn a lot from them. And the biggest change that I've made, because I love to talk, is to ask questions,
Yeah.
to listen,
Yeah.
to know
Yeah.
people. And the greatest thing, and this goes back to Reformed theology, is I've learned I'm not there to save people. I'm there to plant seeds.
Sure.
And if I can get someone's contact information, it makes all the difference, because it means I'm going to see them.
Right.
But I would love to get other people involved with just the ease
Yep.
that it takes just to share the gospel.
Yep.
That everyone God brings in your life on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is, I believe, one of the biblical mechanisms for evangelism is street or public proclamation. Jesus intentionally sends out the 12 and the 72 to teach them how to witness to strangers. Publicly declaring the gospel is always a good thing, in my view. Interpersonal invitation, Mitch, you mentioned as well, is extremely powerful. For a while, my wife was leading the league in church invitation when my kids were young and playing soccer. Not true anymore. My kids are unfortunately out of soccer. But my wife was so good at sitting next to other people and just getting to know other moms on the team, and then finally inviting them to church. She had a really high success rate of getting people to come to church when our kids were little. And if you know my wife, she's not like, you wouldn't think evangelist with her, but it was just that presence, ministry of friendship. Anything else? Yeah, Kevin.
Pittsburgh Presbyterian has a church plant effort in Jeanette, and it started, the way they have started, was ministering to families through after-school programs.
Yeah.
There are a lot of single parents.
Right.
It's a fairly depressed area.
Mm-hmm.
So they were supplying meals for the kids after school and also as essentially childcare. But tutoring became part of that. It has grown rather significantly through the years, and the church has also benefited.
Cool.
Some of those families have been impacted.
Yeah.
Starting attending.
Yeah.
So it's worked slowly.
Yep.
It is growing, and it's great to see.
Yeah, so that sounds like a church that's really just kind of in tune with and in touch with the needs of its particular community.
Yeah, and they're focusing strictly on, they have a specific demographic target.
Right.
But that's what they're doing.
That's what they're in there. Yeah, lean into that strong. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Glenn.
Something that we've seen be very good is group gatherings.
Uh-huh.
Homes,
Uh-huh.
community.
Yep.
We've done Bible prayer. Number one, we've had a group that has met for prayer, book studies. We're doing this biblical citizenship in our community right now.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
didn't know if it would take off.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up with 29 people sign up.
Wow, praise God.
16 people from our community,
Yeah.
which didn't think anybody would come.
Yeah.
And we're just almost towards the end of it now. It's
Yep.
been very successful.
So what are you going to do next?
We're going to do something.
Going to do another one, yeah.
We're gonna do something.
Inviting people into your homes. Powerful and biblical, yes. Powerful and biblical, yeah. Bill.
I call my evangelism passive but active.
Mm-hmm.
In parenting, my father told me, you can tell your kids what you want, but they're going to learn what you show them. So I try to remember that all I have to do is live the Christian life in front of my coworkers,
Mm-hmm.
especially the peace, the shalom that true Christians have when things go bad at work,
Yeah.
or in society, when they see that when the wind blows and it doesn't trouble you, because you have Christ,
Mm-hmm.
people want it, and they'll ask,
Yeah.
why is it that this isn't getting me in there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a perfect opportunity to give them what you've been given.
Yes. Yep.
So it's just and sometimes an occasional billboard's helpful.
Yeah. You literally have it written on your sleeves, my friend. Yeah. Yeah.
The idea is, though, that I remember my father, he didn't say much, but what he said was wise.
Yeah.
No matter what you tell people, they'll believe what you show them.
True. Yes. Yep. Very good. Very good. Yeah, Ray.
Similar to that, I'd say relational evangelism, I think they call it, where people are in the sphere of influence.
Mm-hmm.
You actually share that with the gospel with those individuals, that like family,
Mm-hmm.
friends, close friends. And stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's certainly a way to encourage them to come to church.
Yeah. That's so much better. Now, I don't disbelieve in gospel tracts, okay? I don't disbelieve in gospel tracts. Hudson Taylor, greatest missionary in China, reached millions for the gospel, was converted by a gospel tract. He found a tract, he read it, became a Christian, boom. A.W. Tozer was converted by a gospel tract from a street preacher. So I'm not against that. But suppose you do that ridiculous bit where you have that fake $20 bill and on the back there's some gospel and you give that to your waitress as a tip. Like that's not good, right? But building relationships over the long haul with people, building trust, building friendship, building confidence so that you're in a position to speak truth into their lives, waiting even for the moment that they may need the truth when they're going through an illness or a death or a divorce or an injury or something like that. And then you have all of that personal capital built up is so much more powerful than that kind of randomized moment, though I'm not against that either. All right, well, we got to take a break, and this is going to be our walking break. We have 10 minutes.